Did anything jump out at you from the book? Anything that you're like, that's interesting, or I completely agree, or I completely disagree? Was there anything from chapter 1 that stood out? And let's just talk about it a little bit before we get into class discussion.
I kind of like that talk about Hitler.
Okay, yeah, explain. What did you find interesting about that?
I mean, we kind of talked about it before everybody got in here. Talked about how, he was a good leader. I mean, he got people to follow him, but he's just a bad guy,
Yeah.
I think it just helps, you figure out how you define leadership, and if you, if morals are a part of that or not, and how that affects what you think of people, or people, in leadership positions or leadership positions,
Yes, absolutely. It talked about the idea, is leadership neutral, in a sense, to where you're looking at the end goal, not to where it's good or bad, or is there a morality component? Are we looking for a greater good? Is that of value? And there's a debate in leadership about that. And kind of where you fall on that is where you would decide, I do see Hitler as a leader. But if you think morality is a component of leadership, then you probably wouldn't take that neutral stance, and you would see it more as being, well, he wasn't a leader because he didn't have a good moral compass, so to speak. So in this class, we will a little bit later talk about ethics and leadership, and we'll get a little more detail in that. So that was a good introduction into that concept and that idea of neutrality in leadership or morality. Anybody else? Yes.
I thought the trait versus process, leadership was really interesting because it goes back to that topic of, can anyone be a leader?
Yes.
Are we born with natural leadership traits, or is that something that can be developed over time?
Absolutely, and we'll talk about that a little more in class today. Trait is when leadership first began, and we'll really jump into trait specifically next week in chapter 2. But can anybody be a leader? Or do you have to have a special gift, kind of that superhero approach with leadership? So definitely. Yes.
I thought it was really interesting in the first few pages of chapter 1 how they were talking about the different trends in leadership throughout the decades. Because obviously, way years ago, there were people taking over empires, and you had to have strong leaders to do that, but people weren't focusing on building strong leaders then. That just really made me think.
Yeah, that it's been an evolution over the years on how scholars have conceptualized leadership, what makes someone a leader, and then that goes again from that trait approach to seeing that it's only about the leader, let's focus on them, to looking at, well, maybe there's more components to it. Maybe we should look at behaviors of leaders. Maybe we should look at the situation that people are in that make them want to lead in a specific way. So it's been a big evolution over years to kind of see where we stand with leadership research. Anybody else have anything? Yes.
I really liked how it talked about that leaders are not above followers, and that they're in a relationship together on the same side of the coin. I really liked that.
Yes, the hierarchy approach to leadership. Is there really a hierarchy there, or should leaders be more on the level playing field? Just because you're a leader doesn't make you better than those that are following you.
That's how you build a relationship with your followers. If you're a leader, that's how you build a relationship. Put yourself on the same level.
Yeah. Some people really appreciate that. But then you look at it, some people feel like if you're too close and too accessible, then I feel like, why should I listen to you? So very important, that relationship dynamic, so you can understand how to better lead. One more point. Anybody else have something?
So I like how they explain the differences of position power and personal power, and what the basis of the different types of leadership and stuff.
Yes. And we're going to spend a lot of time on that today, but big part and big concept is that leader is intertwined, or power is intertwined into leadership. I mean, it's hard to kind of see it separately, but it's definitely a big part of it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your definitions of leadership. This will give you a little bit of an idea of what we're going to talk about today. But I want some of you to kind of share how you define leadership, and I'm going to write down a few things that I think kind of are important from your definitions. And then these slides are on Canvas, just so you know, so you don't have to copy everything. I know some of you maybe have printed it already. It's really up to you, but all this is on Canvas, so don't feel pressured. But who wants to share the definition that they came up? Yes.
I put leadership is setting people up for success or preparing them to get up from failing.
That's interesting. So it's pretty a supportive approach. Put supportive. Okay.
I defined leadership as the responsibility to recognize the potential in people and ideas and being fully and completely selfless when developing that potential.
Oh, very good. So I would say selfless, responsibility, sorry. And you said being able to recognize that when they're in it? Okay. Yes.
Leadership is not only leading from a title position, but leading from a position of influence where you are serving and empowering others.
Oh, I like that. Some of those things you said, influence, empower. You said that position doesn't always make someone a leader. Very good. Anybody else? Want to share what they came up with leadership? One more?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, okay. I'll let both of you. Yeah, too. I'll let both of you go.
Okay, so I put that leadership is encouraging, supporting other leaders and followers towards their group and personal goals so that they are successful.
Okay. So I'll put goals. Could you put group and personal? So I'll put group, G and P for group and personal. And then you said something about supportive too, so we have that one. So go ahead, Monica.
I said leadership is the way in which relationships between individuals grow to work to serve and better the lives and conditions of others.
Oh yeah, very much morality in that, for sure. So, better, which I'll say improve. And I'll put collaboration because you're talking about working together. Okay, so all of these things that you guys have mentioned, I think it would be fair to say are all parts of leadership. Each part of that is that you would see happen in a leadership relationship. And then as you read in the book, it talks a lot about no one can really agree on one definition of leadership. That one has evolved over the years into different things. Those definitions that we talked about on Tuesday are all different definitions that have come through research that people have come up with on how leadership works. But for the purpose of this class, we're going to use one definition that you will need to remember. It's not necessarily the best definition, but it's the definition that we will use in here. And it does incorporate some of those things that you all shared. So leadership is a process whereby an individual influences a group of individuals to achieve a common goal. So you want to make sure you write that down. You'll definitely see it again. But this is the definition that we'll use for this course. So it's a process whereby an individual influences a group of individuals to achieve a common goal. So in this definition, what are some key words that you think are really critical to this definition?
Influences.
Which one?
Influences.
Influences. Why is influences important in this definition?
Well, you can look at influence two ways. You have a good and bad influence. So if an individual is to influence a group of individuals, they want to do good. So to achieve a common goal, you have to influence everybody.
Right. Influence has to be there in order for someone to lead someone to do something specific. That ties into the idea of power. Influence is tied to power. What's another word that stands out in this definition? Process. Why process?
It's not just one thing, it's like it's hard to explain, but it's a process. It's not just one step necessarily.
Yeah, I'll let you go first and then.
Just building off that, 'cause
Right.
what I was gonna say
Right.
is that, like she said, okay, make sure. Like she said, like it's not just one thing that makes a leadership, like makes a leader a leader. You know, leadership is like you're working with your followers on like getting to these goals. So like you'll have to take like what is it? Like advice or like input from like outer people, so that way you know that everyone has a part in it.
Mm-hmm. You building on process too?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I think just that it includes common goals. Like you have to take those steps to get there. So I think it's really important to include process in that.
Yeah. So when you think of the idea of process, the process really alludes to the idea that leadership involves relationship, that it's an interaction between one individual and a group of individuals, right? So that process piece allows the leader, like you said, to kind of understand the dynamics of the group, understand the relationships that maybe need to be built, understand what needs to happen in order to get the most out of their followers. It really depends on kind of the theory that we apply to that idea, but process is simply the interaction that is happening between that leader and that, well, I'll say individual and group of individuals instead of saying leader and followers. We'll keep it with that. And then you kind of talked about common goal. Did anybody want to mention anything else about common goal being important?
Common goal is what everybody kind of sees as the same thing. It's common in everybody. So
Yes.
if it's common in the group, then you're all on the right page.
Absolutely. It's a mutual benefit
Yeah.
there. I know some of you, I think when we talked on Tuesday, talked about the mutual benefit that you guys liked in some of those definitions, that everybody wins if we all win. So this is a definition, again, you want to make sure you remember. Definitely may see it on an exam or quiz or something like that. And then this leadership definition will also guide us and remember it as we, again, apply those different theories that we'll go through. So leadership is described in these different ways, and we're going to kind of go through these. First, trait versus process definition, kind of what we talked about at the beginning. So again, when we think about the idea of trait, that is looking at the leader is that he or she is born a leader. This is something that they just got something special that other people don't have. Kind of like when they say they just have it, or they're just athletic. Those things that just you can't necessarily work at, but you have that natural ability. Some people see that concept being applied to leadership. And these are the characteristics, especially when we're looking way back, when leadership research first started. Height played a role. People thought people who were taller had a better ability to be a leader. I don't know how many people feel like that today, but that definitely was one of the traits that people applied to leadership back then. Intelligence, fluency, other traits. How people can see you as a leader based on kind of that you stand out, you're special, that superhero quality that you can't learn, something you're born with. So then when we look at the process definition, again, remember that process is what? What is the key point of what process means in that definition?
Goal.
Relationship and interaction. The interaction that the individual has with a group of individuals. The leader and the follower. So remembering that piece, that gives you the idea that, well, this can be learned. If this is just a process and this is just a strategy that I need to develop to learn how to work better with people, then the idea of leadership can be learned. I don't have to be born with specific traits to be able to do that well. So that's what you want to see as far as the difference between those two. Then assigned versus emergent leadership. Assigned leadership is obviously when someone is put into a position or given a role, therefore they are that leader. But emergent leadership, that's often perceived by the group. So when you look at assign, maybe the company promotes somebody, but the group maybe is more so interested in following the concept of someone else who has built relationships or has been sensitive to different things and has different abilities that are attractive to the group to where they have naturally emerged as that leader. Have you guys ever been in situations where you were more excited to engage with someone you perceived as a leader than maybe your actual supervisor? Let's give an example.
Yeah, I work at was on the third key, and I would rather work with my assistant manager than my head manager.
Why?
My head manager was more, I'm going to tell you what's due, and I'm going to be more stern about it, and I don't care what you think. Whereas my assistant manager would actually help. Or offered, at least offered to help. So, wouldn't tell you to go do something and then go sit back down.
For sure, for sure. More so engaged with the people that were following them than just telling them. We're going to talk a little bit about leadership versus management today as well. Anybody else have an example of when the emergent leader was more appealing than the assigned leader that you had?
Sometimes in high school, I'd like our student teachers more than our actual teachers.
Oh yeah, why?
I think just because, same thing, kind of like the teachers were more strict and the student teachers were, a little bit, not so much more willing to help, but a little bit more relatable. Probably because they were closer to my age, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Kind of maybe even saying firm but not rigid. Seeking others' opinions. Having more of those dialogues with the students because they are not seen as the highest level in hierarchy in that classroom. So they had more of a probably felt they had more of a flexibility there. So these are the two kind of groups of leaders that we'll see in different situations. Obviously the ones that are assigned, but we will see those people that just kind of come up because of the relationships that they're able to build with people. Now we're talking a little bit about leadership versus management. Text talks about that management produces order and consistency and leadership produces change and movement. Kind of based off of what you've read and applying that to your experiences, do you think that managers can be leaders?
Yeah.
Okay. Why?
When you look at it, a manager was put in that position for a reason. You don't just get placed as a manager for, last. When you're placed as a manager, you can handle business as well as be a good employee as well as lead others. Your other fellow employees as well.
Okay. So with your example, your specific example, because you have your store manager and your assistant manager. So from what you described, it seems like your manager is very focused on kind of the objective of the business, maybe the bottom line, keeping that order, keeping that structure. But your assistant manager seems to maybe incorporate some of these leadership qualities that we see with establishing direction, but also motivating and maybe inspiring the team to want to do more. So you can see that you can have both experiences and incorporate that. But a lot of times, depending on departments you're in, you'll see people kind of blur the lines between management and leadership. And understanding that just because you are a manager does not necessarily mean you are a leader. So then going back to thinking of, okay, when leaders are assigned a position, maybe they're that leader on paper, but does that necessarily mean that everybody views them as a leader? That's why when we look at research, it's very important to understand how research has evolved to think about what the people who have become followers in different situations, how they feel, how they view leadership, because that overall will increase the effectiveness of leadership. But one thing too is that everybody has different preferences on how they want to be led. but can you have an organization be successful with only having managers and no leaders?
Depends on the goals.
Okay, explain.
Like, you could take a class and you could set your goal for a C, you know what I'm saying, but someone else could set it as an A. So it just kind of depends on how high your goals are within that organization. And if your goals are low, then management would be perfectly fine. If your goals are high, then you probably need the leadership role in there too.
Okay. So we can kind of think, I don't know if you guys remember when they were talking about Amazon and like a lot of the workers that maybe were kind of on the lower end of the totem pole were talking about poor treatment and that they didn't really like the working conditions. I mean, Amazon is an extremely successful company. So, you know, but thinking about, is there a leadership component there in some of those environments that people described? Or do you think they were experiencing more of management, trying to increase sales, increase revenue, but not necessarily caring about the goals of the people who are working there, not necessarily caring about trying to create significant change for improvement unless it was attached to revenue? So that's probably an example that I would use to say where we're seeing management is being more so utilized than leadership. Can you have an organization be successful with only leadership and no management?
No.
Why not?
Because I feel like sometimes being like in that leadership, it's hard because if you're too close to somebody, it's going to be hard to be like, hey, you got to do this, you know? So I feel like you have to have a good balance between them. Because you don't want to upset anyone whenever you build that relationship up too much.
Some people do struggle with that more than others, for sure. You definitely need both, because it's great to have all these ideas and wanting to inspire and get everybody on board. But if there is no consistency and there is no clear direction or any accountability there to enforce the change, because I kind of look at leadership as more of a visionary. Kind of get into that with the next slide. Leaders have a much broader perspective of organizations. Leaders should be thinking 10, 20, 30 years down the line of what this organization needs to be and become. They shape ideas. They change how people think about what's possible. They also try to help people overcome barriers. Managers tend to be a little more reactive. They live a little bit more in the moment. Because again, if they're going to their office, looking at numbers each day, seeing that we have a huge shrink rate or anything like that, then they're going to want to make sure that they're trying to stop that before it becomes too serious and detrimental to the business. Sometimes they maybe are seen as low emotional, low relational, because they are a little bit more disengaged from the overall growth of the individuals who are following them, but more so focused on the overall growth of the business that they're working for or the organization that they're working for. So that's why you need to understand that there is a distinct difference between leaders and managers, but that does not mean that the person can't be two in one. I think a well-balanced manager would definitely try to incorporate some leadership into their management style, because that's going to probably increase the effectiveness, but also if you can increase the effectiveness of employees, then you're going to increase the bottom line of the business because everybody's working hard. Does that make sense? Okay, leadership and power. So again, power is the capacity or potential to be able to influence someone to do something that you want them to do. Now, whatever it is that you want them to do could be either individual in nature or it can be intertwined into something that the company wants or the organizational goals. These are the 6 bases of power that you want to make sure you remember. We're going to go through these. You want to make sure that you know these and understand these as we go throughout the semester and prepare for the exam. So this is taken straight from your book. And this lists out the definitions that we see with the different power bases. So with referent power, this is really dependent upon your likability and respect. This is when you can get people to do what you want just based off of the fact that they really like you and really respect you. Have you had any kind of leader in your life that you're willing to do what it is that they need you to do, day or night, just because you respect them and really like them and enjoy their company, you know, as the role of leader that they play in their life? Can anyone share an example of that?
My boss is really good to all of his employees and, you know, pays us well, always make sure, you know, that we're valued, and so we all respect him a lot. And, yeah, anything he asks for, we're willing to do, even if we have to make sacrifices in the workplace, just because we all respect him so much.
Wow. And that makes it easy, especially in retail. Like, that is huge. When you have someone who's calling out, and people see that number from the business calling you, I've been there, and I don't want to go in. But sometimes the manager I really enjoy, like, I'll go in for them because I respect them and they take care of me when I'm there. So even though I really would prefer not to, that really drives me to want to support them, for sure. So referent power can really, really be crucial sometimes to help get people on board. Expert power. This is when others perceive you as being competent or knowledgeable. So again, these two are things where it's the perception of others that affects your ability to have power in a situation. Can you guys think of any examples where expert power is utilized? Einstein? Okay, why?
I mean, he's the one who helped create the two nuclear bombs we dropped on Japan. And without his intelligence, we wouldn't have, may not have won that.
Right.
His genius, his sciences were used to help us in the end goal.
Okay, for sure. So expert power, that probably gave him the ability where people would probably rush to go watch him speak during those times. I've seen photos of him speaking to different groups.
Or you could use Stephen Hawking.
Okay, why?
Stephen Hawking, although he's in a wheelchair and has to speak through the wheelchair,
Mm-hmm.
is very intelligent, very smart, as well as kind of inspiring.
Okay, yeah. I would even say, too, doctors. Now, depending on what kind of doctor or what kind of treatment you prefer, a doctor comes in and tells you to do something. If you have a doctor that's aligned with your form of treatment, then you're probably going to listen because you're going to trust, well, you're the expert, so I'm going to trust that you're telling me what I need to do is right. But I think now, these days, we're seeing a divide in how people choose their doctors or choose their health care. So I think that's really important to acknowledge with expert power, because not everybody views everyone as an expert. Not everybody can be on the same page with that. So it's very important to kind of recognize that it's not just kind of one shoe fits all situation. It's definitely the perspective of the follower. So again, referent power and expert power, the follower has a role in how that power is utilized. Next, we'll look at legitimate power. That's just having a specific role, having status, kind of that assigned, like leadership, being a director. Anything on campus, can you think of any people on campus that have legitimate power based off of that idea?
Maybe Dr. Shrimp, the president.
Absolutely. I mean, she is the decision maker, viewed as the figurehead on this campus. Absolutely legitimate power. Anybody else?
Elected officials.
Yes, elected officials for sure. They have the authority to sign into law. I'd say that's the ultimate legitimate power for sure. I think people are a little more sensitive to those things now. Anybody else?
Department heads.
Yes, department heads. Yeah, we see that hierarchy because they definitely run what's going on in the department. They may answer to Dr. Shroom in different capacities. Will answer to the dean, and then the deans answer to the vice president, all these things. But definitely department heads are legitimate power. within schools. Okay, the next one, reward. This is derived from having the ability to give rewards to people. This could be something where, I guess me, if I'm like, hey, if you guys come to class, I'm going to give you extra credit each day. That's some incentive for some people. Some people don't care about extra credit, but that's some incentive to get people to class if I utilize rewards. Sometimes parents use rewards, like, have you ever been paid for good grades in your house or paid for something good you did around the house, whether it's your chores or whatever? I definitely understand that. I mean, we don't necessarily pay my son to wash the dishes, but I'm sure he'd appreciate it. But sometimes extra stuff, if he's doing extra things that I'm like, it's really my responsibility, I might throw, but I pay him low, very, very cheap labor. So I'm sure he wouldn't appreciate that. But definitely a reward is there. Or like with my daughter, sometimes it's like, oh, you eat your dinner, you get some dessert, you get a popsicle or something like that. And I mean, that's pretty much enough for her to clean her plate. So that has worked really, really well. What about coercive power? That's having the ability to punish. So we could definitely see the flip side of that with parents. Maybe some of your parents use more punishment than rewards. But definitely punishment is something that is utilized in some regard to get you to do what you want. Where do you see that in the workplace of punishment being used? Coercion being used?
Write-ups.
Yes.
Threatening to write you up.
Absolutely.
Suspensions.
Yes. Especially suspensions without pay.
Yeah.
That'll make you get right real quick. Yeah.
I think a really good example from last year that someone brought up, it's not in the workplace, but getting a ticket when you speed is like the ultimate version, like that is coercion at its finest.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
It's a really good example.
It's really bad. I've gotten more tickets than I probably should. And I remember one time I used to drive through, kind of like what Dr. Klein experienced. I drove through a small town to get to college. And there was this they have a course of speed trap. It goes from like 55 to like 35, like that fast. And there's a cop waiting right there. And he pulled me over. And I don't know, I'm really not the type to be upset like that. Because most time I'm just not going to communicate. But he pulled me over. I'm like, man, like I can't afford a ticket right now. I'm a broke college student. I just can't afford it. And he brought it to my car, and I'm just like, got upset. And I started crying. And he's like, you really shouldn't be upset. You shouldn't drive like this. And I'm like, you just gave me a $200 ticket in a small town I got to come back to court for, and you're going to give me a ticket? I haven't gotten a ticket from that area since. If I don't stop speeding anywhere, I've definitely gotten a ticket since then in other areas, but I haven't gotten a ticket from there in that particular area since. So his power definitely worked. I had to pay it off. It wasn't a big deal, but it just felt like, a big drain on my bank account where I had other things I'd rather be doing. So definitely a form of coercion is through tickets. I know the parking, I got a ticket when I first started here, tried to make a space and thought I could appeal it, and they were just like, no, you're going to pay the ticket.
Yeah, I'm sorry to work for parking services, but I think they're evil.
Yeah, I understand you got to get your money. I see people walking around, and I get us a job, but that is definitely some incentive to not park in a place you're not supposed to park in, is those tickets. Because they don't play. They're very fast. They get you fast. So information power. This is something that was developed later. These first 5 were developed by French and Horn in the beginning. But information power is developed a little bit later. And this is when people started having the ability to get more access to information. So this is having information when you have particular information that other people want or need. This is seen a lot in consulting, because you're going to pay me for my time to research something and give you a nice presentation because I have something you want that you don't necessarily want to spend the time to find out. So a lot of people will pay you. So that is a form of power that you have, is that you have either information that people want or the ability to access information that people want or need. Has there ever been a situation where you guys have dealt with people that have information power? Maybe you were willing to pay somebody to give you information. Tutoring, absolutely. Tutoring, having the ability to have something that you desperately need. Anybody else?
I feel like in high school, it was just to the point where there was only like one kid in class who actually did the homework.
Oh yeah, I mean college too. Definitely, that kid becomes very powerful towards exam time when people weren't even thinking about him before. Definitely. And I definitely want you to see the difference between information power and expert power, because we can see some similarities there because they both have to do with information and knowledge in some regard. But remember, expert power is how others perceive you as being competent. They see you as being knowledgeable, and they do that. So information power is when you have the other knowledge and information that other people want and need. So I want you guys to kind of see that difference there. And this should help you a little bit on that too. It's understanding the different divisions within these 6 power bases. So understand that we have a positional power that is derived from office or rank in an organization, and then you have personal power. This influence is derived from being seen as likable or knowledgeable. So the personal power, again, like we talked about, this is where other people see you in a specific way. Referent power, that's when people like you, they respect you, they're just super excited to follow you. Expert, people think, man, well, they know what they're talking about, I'm just going to go with them. And then positional power, these are different roles you may have to where you have that. Legitimate, you've been assigned that specific role. You've been given that role. Now you are automatically the director of a department. That is legitimate power. Reward, you have the ability to incentivize people by giving them something that they actually want. Or coercive, you have the ability to give them something that they don't want when they don't do what you want them to do. And then information, you have information that they want or need. You have access to that. So you have that power that comes with that. So you want to make sure that you understand those dynamics. You understand the 6 power bases and what they are, what each of them means. Then you understand the division in that. Where the personal power, are those 6 power bases, is it personal power or is it positional power? Which place do those fall into and why? That goes into understanding what personal power is and positional power is. We talked about this a little bit, is understanding that leadership has changed over time and that access to technology has empowered followers to not only have more access to information, but to ask for a little bit more from leaders, require a little bit more from them. How much have you seen of that now, to where people are literally going after leaders of organizations, leaders, legislators, anybody, and asking them to kind of prove what it is that they said that they were going to do for people, and holding them accountable when they don't, in whatever way they see fit. Technology has certainly helped people have the ability to that. People are communicating more with one another in lightning speed. You can hear what's going on in another country from someone who lives there quicker than you could 50 years ago through access to the internet. And then again, remembering that leadership, when we talk about that interaction, it is the interaction between the people who follow them. It is the social dynamic there. So when we think back to the power bases, that is really focused on the leader itself. This is the power that the leader has, that maybe it's based off the perception that the followers have of them, or it's based off of the position that that leader holds. Okay, so we understand that. So it's the idea of what role does the leader have as it relates to power in their position of leadership. But when we think about that, when we have those different ideas of power, then we're going to get a reaction from the people who are following them, obviously, right? It's not just you're going to give power and everybody's going to be like, okay, that's great, I like all kinds of power. No, people are going to have some opinions and thoughts on and reactions to how power is being utilized in a specific space. So we have 3 areas that we want to remember for this class: commitment, compliance, and resistance. So commitment is the idea you want someone to just naturally be like, I'm on board. I'm committed. I'm willing to do whatever it is you need me to do. I'm 150% in.
Would that be like a referring? Would that be like a referring power?
Yeah. We can go ahead and go there. Yeah, referent power, absolutely. I like you. So I'm going to do what you tell me to do. I'm committed. I don't really need much more besides you telling me that it's important. Reward power. I'm going to do it because I know I'm going to get something positive out of it, so I'm pretty committed. There's a lot of people who go to work and do overtime because they know they're going to get that extra pay. They'll get time and a half, so they say, well, I'm pretty committed to going to work overtime whenever you need me to come in. Or if I know that if I get good grades, I'm going to get paid for those A's that I get, then I might be a little more committed to studying a little extra because I know what I'm going to spend that money on when I get it. So reward and referent often will convince people to have more of a commitment. Compliance. That's more so, okay, I'm going to be compliant, I'm going to do what it is that's expected of me, but it's not necessarily something that I'm just really excited about. I'd say that probably a job I had, I definitely was just compliant. I started doing the bare minimum because I didn't respect my leader, and he definitely didn't like me. So we had problems. So I'm like, I'll be compliant, I'm going to come to work, I'm going to do my job, I'll probably go the extra mile for the other people I like. But for you, I'm going to just do the bare minimum. And that's just being honest, because me as a follower, I wanted a leader that was going to give me specific things. And when I saw that it wasn't being done, well, I don't know, I might have been a little more resistant at that point. I was definitely compliant in the beginning. Legitimate power. Sometimes when people are in position, and that's what I experienced, within a position, and because they held that position, maybe they didn't go the best route about using that power. So sometimes you're going to just listen. Sometimes it's not even a negative experience. Sometimes you're just going to listen because they're in that role, and that's okay. Expert. You tell me that it's important to do this, then I'm going to just make sure that I do it. So if I'm telling you, hey guys, if you study in this way, you'll do well in the exam, maybe you'll say, okay, well, she's teaching the class, so I'm assuming that she's going to tell me what I need to do in order to be successful. So that would be expert power. Reward sometimes can just get you to be compliant because not everybody is incentivized by rewards. So sometimes that extra pay that you get, okay, well, I guess I'll come in, but it's not necessarily something that I just love to do. But the reward is enough to make me just be compliant about that. Or it could just simply be the paycheck. I don't like my job, but I'm going to get paid, period. So that reward of getting paid is going to make me come to work every day. And then coercion. Coercion can make people become compliant. So I think we're seeing a lot of that in people feeling like, well, I guess I have to do something to keep my job. So I guess I'm going to do it to keep my job. I don't necessarily want to, and I'm being forced to because the punishment is that I will lose my job if I don't do something. But it's certainly not excited and committed to it. And then that's where we can kind of see resistance with that coercion. We see a lot of people saying no. And this is not anything to do with your political beliefs or your beliefs in vaccines and all that, but we see that with nurses now. This is a very relevant example. There are nurses that are committed and they're very, incentivized, and they're like, this is important. Vaccines are important. We're seeing some people say, I'm going to get the vaccine as a nurse because I have to keep my job. And the negative part of that is I will lose my job if I don't get it. And then we're seeing people who are resistant to that consequence of not getting the vaccine, to where I'm going to protest or I'm going to just leave my job if I have to get that. So that's just a very relevant example of where we're seeing people lay in these different reactions to power that's being implemented. Very relevant. And then legitimate power. Sometimes those people who get a promotion and they start power tripping. And you're like, you were just a staff member with me yesterday. Now you got a promotion and now you don't know how to act. So now I don't really want to even be around you anymore. And I'm just resisting everything you're telling me you want me to do because this power has gone to your head. Just because you got a title change. Have you ever seen that happen? I've seen it happen on so many levels. I mean, it could be when I was working at PetSmart, Dollar Tree, or it could be when I was working at a university. People change when they get those positions sometimes. And it can really cause people to be very resistant to them. So definitely remember these three groups and remember how the different power bases can fall into these different groups. You want to be able to explain that. So you really want to comprehend what the power bases are, understanding the positional placement of that power base, or understanding if it is more something that is personal, relationship-based, and then understanding the other side of that. What are the reactions that we see from that power base being utilized? So you want to make sure you understand that, and you can probably say that in your own words with that. Definitely want to remember that.
I recommend having your own personal examples for these things because it will really help you remember. And if you like to kind of write that out on a test, we'll be able to understand better.
Yes. Yeah, big hint. A lot of the tests, when there's essay questions, you will be asked to explain and write out what these things mean, but then you'll be asked to apply them to personal experiences or experiences that you've seen or whatever, examples that you have of that. So you definitely want to be able to do that. It's part of the comprehension piece. And then leadership and coercion, kind of like what we were just talking about, even before when we were talking earlier about Adolf Hitler. I mean, even Taliban. I mean, this book, obviously, you have the new version, but this book has been written several times. I have the older version, and it was talking about that. What's going on in Afghanistan now? Very relevant to kind of seeing the dynamics of what people view the Taliban there. I'd probably focus a little bit on that, on how those people who are going to be under the power of the Taliban, how they view that. So when we look at coercion, this is when we see people use force to affect change. Sometimes there's manipulation there, there's threats, there's punishment, there's all those different kinds of experiences. Again, do you guys remember what sometimes we'll see with coercion off of what we just saw as far as reaction? What kind of reaction sometimes can we see with coercion being with threats, punishment, negative consequences? Resistance. And what else was the other one that we saw? Compliance. You can get those reactions from people. So those examples that we see up there are Adolf, Jim Jones, Taliban. Are there any other examples that you can think of where you saw coercion? And what kind of reaction did you see?
Stalin.
Okay, explain.
I mean, if the Russian citizens didn't want to go to war after they're not working, taking them into the industrial age, you just send them to the gulags in Siberia and they just die. You know, I mean, you just kind of like work or die. Or like on the front lines and like the Battle of Stalingrad, you just kind of send dudes out there. You turn around, they're going to shoot you, or you're going to get killed by the Germans. Either way, they're like forcing you to do certain things they wouldn't want to do, you know?
Absolutely. It's a lot of that in war, and definitely a lot of that. Anybody else have an example?
I think a big part of coercion is just like taking away people's autonomy and their ability to act for themselves. When you take that away, that's like that's a form of like coercion, and leadership is taking away people's like right to make their own decisions.
Yeah, I just think we live in such an interesting time, and when we're seeing, a lot of the things we talk about have some connection. So when we see the access to information that comes out, I think it makes it more difficult sometimes with coercion, because people can kind of figure out ways to try to get around it. People can figure out ways to get together in numbers and try to combat it. where that resistance piece comes in. There's a lot of things now that make it more struggle. I mean, could you imagine something like the Holocaust happening right now? Like, could you imagine one person being able to change the dynamic of all people like that in the Holocaust? Do you think it would be as easy, not saying it was easy then, but do you think it would be as easy with Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat, and Instagram? Do you think it would be as easy? So information does change things, and it does change how people use these different power bases. So I want to kind of do a little something with you guys that kind of reiterates the different power bases. Let me think. I think what I want you to do is take out a sheet of paper.
Yeah. Would you ever say that you see a immediate reaction to coercion? Like, when we talk about like certain local regions, would you ever like cults? Like, would you say that that's a commitment reaction to coercion?
Wow, yeah. I think we should talk about that. That's a really good point. That's a good
I
point.
was just thinking about that, and I was like, definitely, like, it's using force and, like, fear to, like, control people's reactions, and people, like, fall in love with it because they get manipulated.
Yeah.
So, I would say it's more commitment than...
That's really good. Okay, I think that's an interesting perspective. Hannah, can you share? Do you want to share it with the class real quick?
Yeah, I just asked her if, like, she would consider like certain religions to have a commitment reaction to coercion, because people are like scared by fear and manipulated into following a certain ideal, but they also fall in love with it because they've been so manipulated. So I would say that it's not just compliance, and it's definitely not resistance, but it is commitment, even though it's still like coercion.
Yeah, I think that is a very interesting perspective. That is a very interesting perspective that I don't, when you look at people who have fear of negative consequences and the actions that they kind of display when they are fearful in those ways, there's certainly a level of commitment. I think, I would accept an argument like that. And I don't know, Erin, how you feel about that, but I mean, I think that would be a valid argument to discuss or write about on an exam that does give a very valid example of how coercion has been used to get people to be committed, and sometimes over time that it takes. Because if you've only grown up into that specific environment, then it seems natural, and it just seems like that's the way that it is. And it gets, I don't know if you guys have taken tech change yet, any of you, talking about diffusions of innovation theory, but a lot of that is cultural norms that are there that maybe aren't normal to us, but it's normal to those cultures, and it's important to respect those cultures too. So I think that is a very valid position. I don't know, what do you think, Erin?
It gets tricky because, I mean, obviously a lot of these things don't exist in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Just from what I know, I think we're just talking about very basic reactions. I think that starts getting into some pretty psychological stuff about kind of what's going on. I do think generally it is very hard to commit through coercion. Not to say can't, probably, but yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think, I definitely would say that I see the ability for that in human behavior. That's why I think most leaders should take a psychology class, because you got to lead people in certain ways. Doesn't mean you're going to necessarily care how they feel, but at least if you understand, you can probably be a little more effective.
I do think with that though, there's something important to think about, like say you're talking about maybe a cult type situation. There's a lot of very appealing things oftentimes. It's not solely coercion that's getting you to commit. There's usually a lot of other factors that would probably go into the other types of power that are really getting you to that commitment stage. So I don't know, I think it's really interesting. If you want to look into that more and share with the class, that would be super cool. But
Well, my mind already goes to like other things, like
Yeah.
animistic religions that are like very fear-based. I don't know, we could like jump into a rabbit hole and talk about this later, but like it's almost entirely fear-based, but they still like are so committed to it because they believe in it so strongly. So I don't know.
No, absolutely. No, I appreciate you sharing. I definitely want you guys to share different connections that you make because that helps you learn the material. It's very important. I mean, I can sit up here and share my examples or this information all day, but if you have connections on how it makes sense to you, definitely share in class because that helps you learn but also helps others. So what I want you to do, just for sake of time, we're going to switch up the activity I initially had planned. What I want you all to do is draw a line down the paper. Okay. Now what I want you to do is write the kind of power, well at the top you can kind of write this, the kind of power that you have utilized in leadership positions that you find to be the most effective. What have you experienced in any of these that you have found to be most effective, you as a leader? And why? So if you've been in a position where you had the ability to reward other people in your organization, did you see a lot of growth in that? Did you see you guys able to reach that common goal? Or was it a situation, maybe you were a manager and you saw if you were going to punish and write up somebody, you saw that that was a more effective use of power for you? What kind of power have you had to utilize in a specific leadership position? And why did you feel it was most effective? On the other side of the paper, I want you to write about what kind of leadership power is most effective when used on you. So what gets you to follow quicker? What gets you to follow in a more happy way, holistic way? What is an ideal leadership power that you would like to see used if you're on the follower side? So one side of the paper is what kind of leadership do I find most effective when I'm using it? And this could definitely be based on your personality. Some people they do better with just coercing people. And some people don't take it like that. They're just like, hey, this is a consequence. You know, I know a lot for me in sports, like you get on the line. If you don't make the shot, you get on the line. That is what it is. I respected it. I didn't enjoy it, but I respected it. And that was how they got the most out of us. So if that's something, some people just can still get respect and still people like them when there is that negative part there. So what is the way that you lead? Which power base do you seem to utilize? And then also what is something that you enjoy as a follower that you're a leader to use? Does that make sense? We just want to talk about it.
As you write these down, remember, I know coercion always sounds really bad and scary, but sometimes it really is effective. When I taught high school, sometimes you have to use some coercive techniques, and it's okay. It's not like I'm punishing a bunch of high school kids, like, horribly. So.
And sometimes the punishment isn't so detrimental either. I mean, getting a video game taken away, I mean, my kids can still live and breathe and eat the next day. I mean, it's not that big a deal, at least to me. No, it seems like it to them, but it's not. So it's going to make you a better person. That's what I always say anyway. You guys about 1 or 2 more minutes. Okay. First, let's start with the kind of leadership that you implement, the kind of power that you utilize when you implement that you find to be the most beneficial. Anybody want to share what they wrote? Yep.
So I put expert power, and the example I used for that is I had an internship at the regional food bank in Oklahoma City, and what I did was I led the really big groups of the volunteers that would come in to like package the meals and stuff, and they really seemed to like trust me a lot and like did everything that I told them that we were supposed to do for the shift because I knew what was going on, I knew what the end goal was and the purpose and everything, and I just felt like that was really effective because I trusted that.
Yeah, definitely. So they saw you and trusted your ability to know what it was that they needed to do. Okay, very good.
I put 3, but the one I used a lot was reward/corrosive. So like I was a core, I don't want to say manager because it wasn't our title, like staff member for camp this summer. And so it's kind of in between normal summer staff and then full-time staff. And so like it was our duty to give out projects and if we wanted them to have downtime and everything like that. So if like we noticed that they were doing a lot, we'd give downtime. But also if they weren't doing what they were supposed to do, we'd give them more projects like walking the camp for trash, stuff like that. And I also had a couple like staff members who I knew liked to work with certain people. And I could be like, hey, if you don't do this, I'm going to switch you off your team and you're going to go work with these people because you're not working hard. And it worked most of the time.
Yeah, that made them want to kind of do what they needed to do. For sure. Anybody else have an example of what kind of power that they see effective when they're in leadership roles?
I use referent.
Okay, yeah.
Personality is big with me, so I always use my personality to know people, and that's helped me hold the management position I have.
People liking and respecting you saw they tended to produce more. Very cool. One more? Yeah.
I said legitimate power. I facilitate conferences with youth, and they like see someone who's a lot older than them, and you like already explained that you have that sort of status, and so you do with those students get a lot of kind of automatic respect from them just by having that position, not necessarily based upon whether you're competent as a facilitator or not.
Yeah, I think that's a very relevant example because like when you look at people, I know Aaron we talk about this a lot, when you look at people and you look really young, but you're in a position that is maybe in a higher regard than the position of people that you are leading, having that position helps sometimes people be able to disconnect your youthful look with the power that you actually have, for sure. Okay, so now on the other side, what kind of power do you like to be utilized that motivates you the most to do what it is you need to do?
I think.
Oh, sorry, let you go. I saw your hand go up, and then we'll come back around. So.
For me, referent power works the best because I think it creates like a mutual liking, respect, and also comfort. And I have had experiences with like negative experiences with coercive power, and so I think that's why I personally prefer a referent more too, because of that, like comfort and respect. I think that comes from a likable leader.
Okay. A likable leader makes you want to kind of work a little harder for that person. And then, like you said, that negative experience of coercion makes you a little resistant to that idea. Good. Saw your hand up?
I said expert power,
Okay.
because I feel like if somebody's knowledgeable about something I'm gonna follow, then it's easier for me to like understand why I'm doing a certain task.
Yeah. So you'll trust them a little more when they tell you something needs to be done, because you trust that they know what they're talking about. Makes sense. I think.
So kind of piggybacking off of Gracie, yeah, I'm definitely more of a relationships oriented kind of person,
Mhm.
so that comfort that you draw from leaders
Yeah.
definitely makes you more willing to, follow them, do whatever they
Mhm.
ask, kind of what you were talking about earlier. If you have someone who's needing you to come in and
Yeah.
they have that referent power, that definitely kind of draws you in and makes you want to do whatever they might need from you. So, and then I think also kind of piggybacking off of him, the expert power.
Mm-hmm.
If you are around someone who's super knowledgeable, super competent, like you gave the example of doctors,
Yeah.
definitely makes you, okay, yeah, sure, whatever
Right.
you say.
Right, exactly.
Kind of along those same lines.
Exactly. Someone else over here had a hand. Okay, sorry.
I think I can respond to like a combination of referent and like coercive. So
Okay.
like I want to really like you and I want you to be personal with me, but I
Yeah.
also want to know that there's a responsibility on my part and that I
Right.
can be punished if I like actually don't fulfill my duties wherever
Right.
I'm needed. So because I think if you get too likable, people get too comfortable with you and then
Mhm.
start slacking off, and then if you stick to only that kind of power, you don't really know how to like pull them back in and make them
Yes.
actually handle their responsibilities.
Absolutely. Yeah, some people need consequences. Some people need to know that I'm not going to have the most likable experience if I don't do this. I mean, I think I look at that example, even like parenting children. Some children are very responsive to rewards. Some are more responsible to punishment than others. So it's definitely depending on the person and understanding that. Again, that relationship interaction piece is helpful when you think about leadership. Anybody else want to share one?
So mine's kind of like a mix of the referent and the reward-based ones. So like the referent ones, like just like what everyone else says,
Yeah.
like I'm a really big relationship person. And then for the reward one, like I want to know that I'm gonna get something in exchange for doing something. So like, if I do like my homework, I know I'm gonna get a good grade if I put a good effort in it. So even if it's something as small as like completing a goal or like getting a good grade, like that's something that like I really look to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Rewards, extra credit, good grades. Good grades sometimes incentivize more people than others. Some people see you get degrees and some people want those cords when they walk across the stage. It really just depends on your preference. So, big takeaways from today. 6 power bases. Want to make sure you know that. Make sure you know the definition of leadership that we're using for this class. And then I want to touch a little bit before we wrap up on some of I read through y'all's kind of excited about, want to learn, concerns. I hope the reading wasn't too terrible. You all did see my announcement saying that the chapters were on Canvas for chapter 1 and next week's reading. So I understand that it is a lot of reading, but you want to, number one, do it to do well in the class. But number two, I hope that you're seeing a lot of this as application-based things you can take away. It's very relevant. So for next week's class, we are going to read chapter 2. You also have your first homework assignment that you will find on Canvas. You're going to take the Big 5 assessment test. There's a link on Canvas for week 2. I made it live this morning, so you should see week 2. You're going to go into that, take it, and print it off and bring it to class, okay? And we're going to talk about that next week, because next week is all about trait theory. Any questions? Yes.
Do we need to read the entire chapter before next class, or like split it up between the 2 classes? Like, how do you
Yes, you'll want to read all of chapter 2 before next class, because that's primarily what we'll be talking about. So yeah, you definitely want to do that. Any other questions?
Yeah, what is our first discussion?
Your first
Our
what?
first discussion?
Like, as far as...
How you have that discussion posted?
Oh, okay, at the top. Those are just like extra credit discussion. So make sure you do it before December 1st if you want to be involved in that. So yeah, that's the only discussion that you'll have. And make sure you read that. That is extra credit opportunity if that's something some of y'all said reward. So look at that.